Have you all got my screen? I'll take that as a yes.
No.
It's a no.
Righto.
It's a no.
How's that?
Yep.
Okay, better.
Yep.
Sorted. Right. Welcome everyone to the second webinar as part of the Dry Time Smart Moves webinar series. These webinars are a collaboration between Murray LLS and Holbrook Landcare, similar to the series of webinars we ran around this time last year, which was our Crappy Seasons Conversations. The aim of these webinars is to give an opportunity for farmers and producers to get some insights and ask their questions around the current seasonal conditions and what the forecasts are saying. So to do that, we've got Beck Stacey again giving us a quick farming forecaster update, and Phil Graham from Graham Advisory is also online tonight to give some insights and answer all of your questions. General housekeeping things, tonight's webinar is recorded and it will be available afterwards. The recording from the last webinar that we had with Jill Kelly is also available. If you would like to get access to that, get in contact with myself or the team at Murray LLS and we can send that out. Otherwise, that's about all from me. I'll hand over to Beck in a second. Everyone should have access to their cameras and microphones. So as Rebecca or Phil are going through, if you've got any questions, chime in whenever and ask those. Hopefully you'll enjoy it, get some insights, and good to see you all again. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Steph. I'll just share my presentation. Hopefully my internet holds up. Can everyone see that one? Yep. Rightio. So yeah, I'm Rebecca Stacey. I'm based in Deniliquin. So certainly I am just sharing a bit of an update off our farming forecaster site, which you can all access free, farmingforecaster.com.au, and look at the different sites available and the information that's there. Phil has also had a fair bit of input into Farming Forecaster and has helped us set up our sites in the Murray region. So he's also certainly able to answer questions around these. So we'll get into it. So this is just a quick little map showing you where the weather stations and soil moisture probes are from the midsection of the region across to the east there. I'm based in Deniliquin, so further west from there. But we've got one at Savernake, Corowa, Mountain Creek, Little Billabong, and then Mundaroo currently. And we've got new probes in Colcan, Rand, up towards Henty. There's another one going live at Glenroy. So Holbrook Landcare Network also has a couple of those, and we've put a couple more in. So there'll be more information coming in the next couple of months from those sites, which will be helpful for everyone. So these are soil moisture probes, weather stations, and then there's a pasture outlook that sits alongside them based on enterprise information for the farm. So if we take a look at Mundaroo, so the current outlook at the moment, this is from the pasture model. So this is based on a Phalaris subclover mix running 500 kilo cows. And as we've spoken about in the last session, so the shaded areas that sit behind the model lines are based on 30-year historic information. So the green is 50 to 90% of your years. Above that is your I guess, your 90 to 100% of the years. Through the yellow section, you're sitting in roughly where you've been 25 to 50% of the time. Red is 10 to 25%, and below the red is your bottom 10% of years. So if we look at Mundaroo at the moment, the black line is what the actual growth has been projected to be based on what's happened with the season and what the enterprise is sitting over that pasture mix. And then your coloured lines are your projections based on percentile, looking at your climate outlook. So if we get a really good run from here on in, you might hit that blue line, which would tip you up into, your top 50 to 90% of your years and heading towards the top of that come mid-December. But if we just get an average bit of rainfall now, where those lines are starting to separate, I've put the red arrow. So if we get rainfall, you might get an average across through that yellow section. So that'd still have you sitting up close to the 3,000 kilos of green dry matter per hectare. This is just modelling green, so it's not what's out in the paddocks, as dry matter or dry dead pasture. But again, if it cuts out, you could end up tracking down where that red line is. So this is not to be doom and gloom. This is to look at it and go, this is what the outlook is. What's some of the decisions that we need to be making if we only get an average bit of rainfall? What decisions do I need to be making come early November? If we head across to Little Billabong. So unfortunately for Little Billabong, since we last caught up in September, it's dropped out a bit. So I've left the red arrow in with roughly where those lines were going to separate, which would, where you start looking for rainfall versus running off the soil moisture. And we've started heading down that red line trajectory. So, again, not to be doom and gloom, but we're currently down around the 1,700 kilos of green dry matter per hectare in your paddocks, based off of Phalaris subannuals mix. So what's some of your decisions? Also have a look out the window, go out to your paddocks. What are your paddocks looking like, relative to this? Are you still getting any growth? What stock are you running? Again, what decisions do you need to be considering? If you get average rainfall now and it bumps up a little bit, have you got enough to get through to, say, that middle of November? Or do you need to start, considering what your options are? Not ideal. I don't envy anyone in this situation, but it's the reality of what you might be considering. So Mountain Creek, again, since we last spoke, it sort of bumped up a little bit and then it's tracked downwards from that mid to late September. Again, the red arrow is roughly where those lines were separating. And as it looks, there hasn't been the rainfall from October on, and it's headed down that red trajectory. So currently still sitting in your 25 to 50% of your years, but it's not, it might not carry you through until November. At this point, you're looking more mid to late October that it'll cut out. If you get good rainfall, again, you can look at the seasonal outlooks, the rainfall outlooks. We might have a bit of a chat about some of that later, but the way it's looking at the moment, need to be planning, making those decisions. What stock are you carrying? What are your options? Have you got feed on hand? And that type of thing. I'll just jump back to one of these first ones, something that I didn't mention. In here, I've put these based on September rainfall. So if you go into the regional map, you can get it to show, rainfall year to date or rainfall last 7 days, whichever you choose. I just put this in for September, and I had a quick look at, compared to September last year, and it's all significantly down on September last year. And I think, probably a lot of you remember last year being quite a tough season as well. So if we put all that together, this might be where you need to really start thinking about what your decisions need to be, what you need to do. So then in terms of your considerations from here, just considering your stocking rate, what livestock have you got? Are you looking at weaners that you're needing to grow and put weight on? Have you got adults out there that you are wanting to maintain condition on for joining? Have you got, big numbers? Maybe you've got cows and calves already, or ewes and lambs, depending on what you're running, or you buy young stock in to fatten. Have a look at what your time of peak nutritional demand is going to be, and what your outlook's looking like. Is it going to match up? What feed have you got on hand? And then what's your plans otherwise? Do you need to seek agistment? Have you got options to sell some, or have you got containment feeding options? And I think some of the questions or commentary that's come through with registrations, it's around water as well. So certainly there's plenty of other considerations that come into, your decision making. It's not just around feed on hand and pasture in your paddock. There's a lot of other things that come into it as well, your capacity for hand feeding and that sort of thing too. So unfortunately, that's the pasture update from me. Again, the models are green dry matter in paddocks. So if you do have some, dry or dead material out there, that might bump it up a little bit as to what's out there, but certainly your outlook for what's going to be there going forwards is not super favourable. So time to start thinking about your decisions and working out what your plan of attack might be. And from there, I'll hand over to Phil.
Thanks, Rebecca. Are people seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Thanks. Look, I think we need to be very clear that you need to assess the situation you are experiencing on your place in a cold, hard, calculated manner. In the last couple of months, I've seen a lot of people. We've gone through one of the third or fourth hardest winter in the last 30 years in southern New South Wales. So people have come out of winter negative. And I'm seeing that negativity being put on top of, for you in the Holbrook district, a less than favourable spring. You put all that together and the result is it's disaster. I don't think it's disaster. We'll go through that. You'll talk to your friends, you'll talk to mates. They're going to make comments. Depends whether they're a pessimistic or optimistic person. You're either going to get positive vibes or negative vibes. I clearly remember the spring of 23 when people made some decisions because they'd end up internalising a very negative position, and those decisions cost them very dearly, even though the reality was not as bad as what they thought it was. So that's why I'm pushing this a little bit. You're assessing your property, you are not assessing the district. Now, Beck took you through summer farming forecast, and I'm going to touch on and look at it in a slightly different way. But one thing that we don't show you is what's happening to dead feed. So this is little billabong, and I just ran this off tonight. So the dotted lines are the dead feed, the solid lines are the green feed. So all you see, and if you like, these are the projection lines. This is nothing to do with the background shading. This is the red, the brown, and I've used black, whereas on Farming Forecaster it's yellow. That's the green line, depending on whether you look at the 10%, 25 or 50%. You can see as the green is dropping, the dead is going up. What you see is a combination of those two things. You see a mixture of green and dead. Now, hopefully there's a upgrade of Farming Forecaster coming, and in the future, you'll see both of these. But sometimes if you just look at the green, you get this impression, oh, look at that, we've got nothing. The reason the green is dropping off because it's moving from the green pool to the dead pool. So in the paddock, it's maybe not quite as bad. What I want to do now is just talk through some things that this graph gives us, this data gives us, to try and help that first point about being cool and calculated in deciding where you're at. So Beck mentioned the shaded data is 30 years historical data. The black line is the current. The beauty about this data is everything stays the same. The soil stays the same, the pasture stays the same, the soil fertility stays the same, the stocking rate stays the same. The only thing that changes, there's 31 years of data for the little billabong area on that graph you're looking at. The only thing that changes is the daily weather. So that makes this data very, very robust. Now you'll notice I've got rid of the kilograms of dry matter on the left-hand side. This applies to everyone in that district. It applies to people who are running 6 DSE or people who are running 15 DSE. People who are running 6 DSE grow less grass. People who are running 15 DSE grow more grass. The interesting thing which I've found over my career is both those people tend to eat the same amount of feed as percentage-wise. Most properties eat somewhere between 40 and 48% of the food they grow. People who run less stock grow less feed, but they still eat 48% or 45% of the food they grow. And it's that percentage figure that makes this data robust. So what have I done? I've drawn a line across the top of the historical where the spring peak is, and I've drawn a line down. So Little Billabong, historically, the spring peak hits late October. And there's the green line. The red line is at the top of the 25% level, which I'd regard as a fail spring. And that often fails out in October. Then I've put a little thing above. Our most profitable window is not way up the top. It's between about 50 and 70% of springs. They're the years that we make our most money. So if we look at this little billabong, you've already gone past a fail spring. You've got that peak back in September. That's feed on your property. That black line has now dropped. The feed hasn't gone away. It's just moved from the green pool to the dead pool. So you've already gone past the fail spring. You are not going to have a fail spring. You're going to be somewhere between an average spring and a fail spring. So on the left is Little Billabong. On the right is the Mountain Creek. And if we look at the Mountain Creek scenario, same pattern in black line, but its peak, it got pretty close to a springtime over at Mountain Creek. The reason it got there was, if you remember what Beck showed, spring rainfall, September rainfall at Mountain Creek was a lot better than Billabong. So they got that rainfall, they turned it into feed. That feed is still on the property. It might be in the form of dead feed instead of green feed, but it is on the property. It is there for animals to eat. So Mountain Creek is not far off a spring. If we go up into the higher country, on the left, now on the right, I've got, but this time I've left 3 of the lines up. So what do they now tell us? The red and the brown lines, so they're the drier end, potential that occur, and there's a 25% chance of being on that brown line or below. If that occurs up there, the best they can most likely look at is a fail spring. They get an average here, the yellow line, they're going to hit a spring. So the next 10 days is going to be critical up there for them to decide, do I keep heading on that yellow line or do I bend over? This is later country, rainfall's a bit better, pasture growth rates are slower. That's why they got more moisture in the ground. So the next 10 days is going to give them an indication up in that high country whether we've gone past a fail spring, we're heading towards an average spring or not. Let's also be pretty clear about what a poor spring means. Pluses and minuses. Pluses. High food quality, both green and dead, and stock will do well. In fact, in poor springs, stock will do very well. Why? Purely that. We've got a quality. Most springs, the bigger the spring, the faster digestibility or the quality factor of our pastures drop off. For young stock, quality is the most important factor going through spring. So the season is keeping quality high, whereas normally in big springs, quality drops rapidly. So you'll be very, very pleased with the way stock are performing. Come to the negatives in a minute. Another positive. I don't think there's anyone in southern New South Wales that hasn't taken a pounding from internal parasites. What's happened earlier this year has been beneficial. Poor spring is continuing to put negative pressure down on worm populations. So that's a plus. And also, we're going to have a lower overburden of dry feed. So if and when, and my view is when, not if, we do get some meaningful rains, the pastures are in a position to respond better than they would be if there's a large body of feed. So poor spring is not all negatives. What are the negatives? Poor spring means we're going to have ground cover issues over summer, and we'll need to manage that, and we tend to do it very well now by containment feeding, but that brings labour and cost into the scenario. And we don't have the chance to replenish fodder reserves. So exactly, it's most likely stock might do very well through to early December, maybe Christmas. It might be after that some of the negative impacts start coming into play. So there are positives. There are positives from the spring you're facing. Again, let's be realistic about the situation we're dealing with. What is the current situation? Livestock markets are good. Excuse me. The season you're experiencing is also being experienced west of you, and I'm aware of people who 10 days ago started cutting cereal crops for fodder, and that might pick up pace. So one of the issues that we talked about in the last slide was inability to replenish hay reserves. Potentially there is a fodder source, an unusual fodder source coming into play not far from you because of crops that just aren't going to make it. The other one, which we'll talk about later, the seasonal forecast is not strongly negative. It's not as if the forecast is saying we're going into a terrible El Nino. We are in a very strange climatic situation, which I think we're most likely going to have to just deal with. There are major issues occurring in the world's climate. Some of you might have seen recently about that massive change in temperature above Antarctica. We've got this enormous area of the Pacific Ocean, which is 3 degrees warmer than it's ever been before. These are factors that haven't occurred before, and the impact they're going to have on our weather, no one knows. That's the simple answer. No one knows. I think what we're going to see is a lot of volatility. If you look at the rainfall events in the last week, if you were under a band, one of those northwest cloud bands, they might have only been 100, 150k wide. If you're under one of those, you've got a smile on your face. And if you were out of that little band, you're not. So, often when I started in this game, we'd see big general rain fronts come through. They don't seem to happen anywhere near as much. We get these smaller ones. They might have good rain in them, but they're more random. The other thing, there are substantial areas in New South Wales that are having a good season. We're going to have we've got a spring at Yass. Hunter Valley's having a fantastic year. Northern New South Wales, things are good. And there were just more rain. I was talking to some cropping people the other day. Cropping yields in Northern New South Wales look fantastic. So if you're in an area where things are doing tough, the one thing you want is for other areas to be doing good, because that provides some opportunities for you, either in markets or agistment. Actions. My view right now, you want to put as much fat or weight onto your stock this spring as you can. To me, the feed you've got in the paddock you use, there's no point trying to save it. And the better the condition and or weight of your stock by January, the more options you have. If you can get an extra 10% of weight into the steers or lambs, it just puts you in a position where you just got a few more options to look at about it. The other thing you need to do is to assess the area of your property which has pastures that can respond to November, December rain. So obviously down the Holbrook district, if you've got lucerne, but there's other pasture varieties will, there's natives certainly will, and some of the introduced species. We have had of late dry Octobers, and then rain comes in November, December. That's become a bit of a pattern. I was just thinking about it today. I think if you look at your place and say, well, I think I've got 25% of my property which can respond with rain, and remember, because there's not a large overburden on it and the plants have been under a bit of stress, and all pastures and even crops are running late, 2 to 3 weeks about where they would normally be. If you've got 25% of your area and we get some rain, I reckon that 25% is enough to make up for a poor spring. Because if we get the moisture, your growth rates are much higher and you can quickly make up the gap. If the percentage is lower than that, well, your sort of get out of jail card with maybe November, December rain isn't as strong for you. In terms of fodder reserves, I think act early. You mightn't be buying all of it, but you might want to act early and get some fodder into the system. Some of the cereal crops that are being cut have been cut early and will be of very good quality. So it's a good product, and it's not far away. But I must add, it's my view that we could certainly go through winter feeding less hay and a bit more grain in supplementing cattle. And I think at a lower cost, and you'd be more than happy with the way the cattle perform. So I might just throw it out there. Do you actually need as much hay as you might have had before? Now, certainly for those who are unfortunately at the bottom end of that, where the season is, ground cover, the harder your spring, the bigger ground cover is going to become a problem for you, maybe post-Christmas. One thing I just throw out there is that even when you do stock a paddock, your ground cover is most likely going to drop by another about 10%, because pasture disappears. It's just not stock to do it. There's a whole lot of insects out there eating it. But if you've got stock off those paddocks, and even if ground cover drops a bit, you've still done a very positive step in maintaining pasture security and soil. Now, here's a bit of an attempt of a decision support tree. This is either very difficult to understand or very helpful for you. To me, so let's work through. Have you a good chance of getting a spring? And by a spring, all I'm talking about is an average spring. You think about it, if you have an average spring, your production system works well, you might be able to cut a bit of hay. For years, average has been okay for you. It's not as if we should be looking for something that's way above average. I was talking to a producer just over the weekend who has already, in his area, he has already gone past his average spring. And he says, we've just got to keep getting rain. We've just got to keep this green food there. And I said, well, why? Why is that so critical? And when it really came down to it, he just happens to be captain of the bushfire brigade. And his driving reason for more rain is to lower bushfire risk. So it's different from his farm point of view. He acknowledged if the season cuts off now, we're fine. We've got enough feed. But there was another factor that came in, which was getting him thinking, geez, we needed to go further. If you get to an average spring, it's a tick. So if you get there, all you do is then just start managing the feed in front of you, making decisions as it comes along. If the answer's no, what do we do? Well, are you closer to an average spring or are you closer to a fail spring? Let's say you're closer to an average spring. And then we think about, well, how much responsive pasture do you have on your place? If you've got that greater than 25%, then in my view, you've got a buffer, and decision times has been pushed back to November. We start getting rain come through in November and those pastures start firing, there you are. The problem's disappeared. If you haven't got much pasture that can respond to those later rains, you're just got to start preparing for a tight summer. Use your pastures now strategically. And what do I mean by that? I mean, make sure that the most critical animals are eating the best pasture. And to me, the most critical is going to be young stock. So if we're in a lamb operation where we can wean earlier, it's the lambs on that feed. For a cattle operation down there, depending on when you've calved, you could early wean, or in fact early weanings are not an option for the later calving situations. But it's just think about using that pasture to the best advantage to yourself, which is putting weight on animals. If you're closer to the failed spring, and you've got that 25% or more a country that can respond, it can still get you out of trouble. And again, November's your crunch time. Again, if you haven't got much country that's responsive, I think you've got to start taking unusual management decisions. And what do I mean by that? Early weaning, changing marketing strategies, looking at culling options. What have I got on the place? I hate to say it, but just about every property is carrying some animals that are poor performers. We always think our stock are brilliant, but not all of them are. And at present, the markets are giving good prices. You're in an unusual situation, and therefore you need to look at unusual options. Summer's going to be tight, and the critical thing is that you protect your pastures and soils, because that's rise your business. If you're in the livestock industry, you're in the business of growing pastures, and soils is what does it. Lose your soils, lose your pastures, and the impact is far, far greater than just the impact of one dry year. It carries on for a very long period of time. Now, I've got one more slide, Kimberly, and then we might, or Steph, whoever, we might go to the questions. One of the questions that was presented beforehand was about pasture growth rates. And people were saying, I think they were basically saying that the numbers on farming forecast was very low, and we grow a lot faster than that. Farming Forecaster has presented information to producers which has never been seen before, and it's not only producers; it's providing information to advisors and agronomists that's never been seen before. Everyone up until this was used to getting a table of growth rates, which were monthly growth rates. And I must admit, I sat round tables back in the early 1990s, generating a lot of those tables that have been used ever since. And they very much were sort of average figures. What I've got up there is the pasture growth rates. I just ran off tonight from the Little Bittlebong site for the rest of 2025. So it's every 7 days. Across the top, there are four columns, 10%, 25, 50, and 75. So on Farming Forecaster, you have those coloured lines. You can have 5 coloured lines. You tick the ones you want. 10% is that 10%. So if the year from here on, and I ran this as of conditions at Little Billabong as of yesterday, 12th of October. If things stay dry, they're the sort of pasture growth rates that one might expect. It's averaged over the week. So that first week from 13th to the 20th, growth rate 29, and then they plummet because why? Because we've used up soil moisture and the plants just shut down. We go to the 25% so there's a 1 in 4 chance of that occurring, and you can see the numbers. People will often say, why do we get that little spike in November? This is a trait that is seen all across southern New South Wales, southern tablelands. And remember, this is based on 30 years of weather data, 1995 to 2024. The end of October is historically a little dry pinch, and then we get a kick in moisture. The 50%, so 50% of years growth rates worse than this, 50% of years growth rates better. But again, you see the numbers, and that October one stands out. You know, you've got 24 the week before, we go 9, and then we jump up to 37. Now, we've never seen this data presented before because all you're being given is monthly growth rates. Once you start being given weekly growth rates, you see numbers that are radically different, and you start saying, oh, geez, they look like a load of crap. Well, if you average all these out, they take you back to where the monthly growth figures are. And then the 75%, if the rain comes in and stays, you can sort of see the numbers. So some people ask for some growth rates. Now, again, it's the intention of the Farming Forecast Committee, which is a producer-driven committee, that when we do the upgrade of the website, that this sort of data will be available every month for every site across the site. So we'll provide you with the growth rates, projected possible growth rates going ahead for the next 4 months. I just ran them off to the end of December just to make it easy. But hopefully people have had enough time to jot some of those down, and this is going to be shared so people could go back to it later. That's the end of my presentation. So if Kimberly, you want to ask me questions, or if other people in the audience want to pose questions, I'm happy to handle them. Or Steph, whoever.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks, Rebecca, for earlier. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves, use the chat function or the Q&A function. On registration, some questions did come through, so we might go through some of those. The first one is, I really want to understand preparing for new pastures, i.e. do this while keeping up production. What are your thoughts, Phil?
If we're in a tight spring, I wouldn't be taking actions about preparation for new pastures. Because if we do those preparations right, we're going to put a little bit more pressure on our spring feed situation. Depending on how severe your locality is, nature could well be doing the job partly for you in reducing annual seed set, which is normally the thing we'd be handling in springtime anyhow. A much lower seed set because the annuals have just run out of moisture very quickly, so they've run up ahead. But whether there's much viable seed and how much, again, it's a personal point of view. If I was in this situation, I would ditch the pasture plans. I might be prepared depending on what autumn looked like next year. If autumn broke early and it had time, we could maybe resurrect that plans and do something. But at present, I'd be inclined, if spring's tough, to give the pasture establishment for next year a pause at this stage.
Sounds good. We've got a hand up from Serena.
It's interesting you say that, Phil, because we've had, despite a lot of spray, complete failure with controlling barley grass in the lucerne crop. The lucerne is, I don't know, 3 years old. And yeah, the barley grass just grew and grew, and we've now got it blowing in the wind. So how to control your barley grass? Is there any resistance that you're witnessing? And it's been suggested that we could put it to general pasture for fodder production next year.
Look, resistance is always there. I wouldn't necessarily say resistance is the major reason it's occurred, but we can't ignore it. Barley grass is a prolific seeder like annual ryegrass, and anything that has great seed production increases the risk of resistance developing. Look, it could be a timing factor. There's a range of issues. I don't think I could really. It depends in the current situation. What were you hoping to use the paddock for?
Well, lucerne, a beautiful lucerne hay crop. It produced quite well last year, but yeah, there was a bit of barley grass, and now it's just sort of it's in about 30%.
Well, I'm not going to use it for a hay crop. I'd just I'd put stock in and eat it.
Oh, yeah. Well, thinking of turning it into silage, but not silage so much as wrapped silage. So yeah.
Oh, geez, you're going to have to mount a better case than that before I'm going to agree with you. You know, if the barley grass is really in head and gone off, it doesn't matter what you do, the quality of whatever you make's disappearing. And contrary to popular belief, wrapping something in green plastic does not improve the quality.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, let's spread the seed.
I think all I can say is without seeing it, I'd most certainly be more inclined to graze it. If you were going to cut it, I presume you cut it yesterday and you're baling it tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it can't happen. So
yeah,
it wouldn't happen for a week.
Well, yeah. And as each week goes past, your quality just disappears out, and you spend a lot of money wrapping stuff up, and there's no point wrapping crap up.
Well, that might save a headache. Okay, thank you.
You know, I never sit on the fence.
No, I know, Phil. Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, Serena. There's another one that came through. Explain the outlook for late spring. How do you assess stocking rates in a bobtailed spring? Do you have any more points to make, Phil?
Oh, no, I think again, let's be very clear, is that stock can do very well in the bobtail spring until the food runs out. So the quality of the dead feed in a bobtail spring can be higher than the quality of green feed in a big spring. Colour's different, but it hasn't gone through the full reproductive phase, so the quality stays a lot higher. So it's there, we utilise it, and when it runs out and we start using ground cover of our guide to say, rightio, we've got as much out of it as this paddock as we can, we now have to move on. But turn whatever food you've got, whether it's green or dead, into weight on animals. And then assess your option down the track depending on when that point in time comes. I'm not convinced that the growing conditions for this year has gone. I looked very, very quickly tonight. I went back and looked at Holbrook data. It was the Little Billabong data again. and I looked at the last 15 years of green pasture production between the 1st of November and the end of February, the last 15 years, and then the 15 years before that. So 2005 back to 15, and then we go back to 95. The first 15 years, so in the 90s and the early 2000s, grew 62% of the feed that we've grown between November and February in the last 15 years. And that pattern is no different at Yass, no different at Young. The numbers might change. In the last 15 years, we have seen more summer rain and more pasture production. Is that a long-term trend? I don't know. If I'm still around in another 15 years and it's like that, I'll be happy to say it's a long-term trend. I've seen too many years of late, whereas in points of October, people were despairing, and by the end of November, they had a smile on their face. I still haven't given up on this year. Now, and people might say, well, Phil, how can you come up making that comment? That's just me reading of the tea leaves, and my reading of the tea leaves is no different to your reading of the tea leaves. But there's still indicators that moisture's around, and Holbrook to Yass isn't that far, and the attitude amongst the producers in the two districts is radically different. All you need is some fronts to come through that drift 200 k's further south, and suddenly we're talking about another ball game. There's moisture around. So, yeah, I haven't given up on this year.
No. Andy, got a hand up.
Yeah, Andy Wenhall. I had a couple of questions I sent through, and I think Phil's kind of covered off on them, really. But like looking at feed budgets and whatnot, and planning fodder reserves and hay and straw or whatever. Not so much the grain, because you can buy that relatively off the header, but just looking at those growth rates, we're probably having, like, the moisture has run out. Like, I think we've had 120 mils in 125 mils in 120 days, which is kind of scary to think that you've got that 20th of October's going down from 29 to 4 mils. Like, it's almost those days that the mills have run out of those days, like a mill a day or whatever. But I was just wondering, Phil, the question was those growth rates, like, say 29, say we're at a 10%, there's no moisture left. If we get a rain event in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time of substantial of value, 20 mils or so, do you start jumping up to 50% growth rates to put into your fodder budget, or like how?
Yes, you do. You think of each week as an individual event. So if we get to, let's say we get to the 20th of October, we've had a good fall of rain. Just because you thought, we're on the 10% line, we suddenly get the rain, you jump sideways. If it's a really good fall of rain, you could in fact jump up into the 70s, 75% in terms of growth rate.
Even though you Phalaris, so say we're mainly Phalaris clover, you still, like, they've gone to head. Like your ryegrass has gone to head. You've obviously individually got to assess that. But if your Phalaris and your ryegrass is going to head now, and your clover's starting to go, but
so if
you obviously can't jump too far up.
You can jump a long way up for 1 week.
Mm.
So this is, I think the thing is, because you've never seen before growth rates other than monthly figures. Growth rate within a week could range from 10 to 70. In a week, we've got 7 days. The growth rate of a pasture is dependent upon the conditions that apply for that day. Moisture, temperature, solar radiation, a whole lot of things. So they can change very quickly. Now, you've raised some very good points about you don't kid yourself, you're going to go too far when a lot of your pasture species are in head.
And I think just like
on it, but Phalaris to me, while it's still in head, there is still green leaf in the system. It depends when it comes. If it comes in the next couple of weeks, I think you'll get a response. If it's 3 weeks, you mightn't get the response. Is there still? I think what you look for, have we still got green leaf in the system? If there's still green leaf in the system, that plant will respond to that moisture with growth.
Mm.
Certainly the Phalaris, a bit of clover, not so much the ryegrass.
Yeah, no, I get that. No, it's just like you said, we haven't seen it in weeks or days or whatnot. We've always seen it monthly. And October for here is 64, and November's 43, and like that's on a standard year, off Evergraze whatnot. But there's no way we're growing. We've no way we probably reach. We might have reached it end of September, but there's no way we've got up to 64 kilos of dry matter for October. So it does throw your fodder budgets out when you're using those numbers. And that's probably why the pasture forecaster tool is quite handy, because you can look at it and it says 20. So it's the weekly input that you're putting into the model, I think, will be really beneficial.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil.
No worries. Just the other thing is just keep an eye on the black line. So if a rainfall event comes and the black line doesn't respond, that's telling you that the pasture's gone past the point of responding. That black line gets updated every 7 days. For the sort of pastures you described, you really want some really meaningful rain before the end of October. Just don't write off how pastures can kick back, because as I said, this year pastures are slow. I reckon they're 3 weeks slower than where they would normally be, and that's a function that will come out of a tough winter. Coming out of a tough winter, we go into spring slower, and because of that, the whole plant physiology seems to be pushed back a bit. So that buys us a bit of time. If you're in a typical Holbrook spring, the pastures would be more advanced, the plants would be more advanced, and they wouldn't be able to recover if we do get some meaningful rain.
Steph, sorry, one more question, Phil. Just in terms of your pastures at the moment, so if you got cows and calves, say that's the stock class, and they're on 1,700 kilos, and you got a paddock that's 2,200 kilos, would your thought be go in and chase that feed that's at a higher level before it gets reproductive, or would you keep grazing that 1,700 down to 1,400, 1,500, or do you chase do you go and chase the higher?
Yeah, radio.
Do you leave residual, or do you leave a greater residual and keep going and defer it, or yeah?
Well, if growth rates are looking low, leaving residual doesn't. We leave residual to stimulate growth. If we run out of moisture, the residual to stimulate growth becomes irrelevant because we haven't got the moisture to do it. My comment would be driven by between two paddocks is where did those two paddocks sit in terms of aspect? Is one more sheltered? Is one more exposed? I'd take the exposed one first, and then I'd go into the sheltered one. I think aspect is one higher, one lower, soil depth, those sort of things would influence me where I go more than the herbage mass.
Yeah, right. That's interesting.
The bottom line most likely is it doesn't make much difference.
Yep. I guess it's just the bite size, isn't it? So you can go low enough and then move on, I guess.
Yeah. Sometimes we try to make our decisions a bit more complicated than they need to be.
That sounds good. Thanks, Andy. We're nearing the end. Last question, Phil, and this one's going to test you. What's the most reliable weather forecast source?
Yeah, thank you, young lady. You're cute.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you said it with a smile. All weather forecasts have a large error bar around them, regardless of which organisation does them. No, all the organisations share a lot of data. In fact, the first United Nations in the world was the World Meteorological Organisation. So every day, Australia sends climatic data to the rest of the world. The European have the best model because they've spent the most money and they've got a small landmass and a lot of people. The European forecasts for what the weather's going to be in cities in Europe is improved because they get information from Australia. Not substantially, but it's still there, right? The weather we experience is a global phenomenon. When BOM do their work, they just don't use their model. They use models from around the world. And if you go onto their site, you can see the various models they use. The other countries do the same thing. Look, I think you've got to go. I use BOM. I think you've got to use one model and stick with it. I think the one thing you can't do is go model shopping. I know producers will do it. They'll hunt around to find a model they want that gives them the answer they want. And they say, there it is. All of them have limitations. We're all trying hard to improve it. Point I made earlier, I think where we are now and looking ahead is that we're starting to get major new events occurring in the world system, which is buggering up our understanding. And that's going to create difficulties. I think it's going to be variable. To me, the biggest problem we've got is if you look at BOM's forecast for New South Wales, there's going to be a fair chunk of areas where it's going to be right, and there's going to be areas where it's going to be wrong. It's this fact that we're not getting major widespread fronts anymore. We're getting these a lot more narrow, volatile little events, and it becomes a bit of a lottery. So I don't think seasonal forecasting is going to get any better. We might have seen the best of seasonal forecasting. That's a totally I'm not a meteorologist, but just my view of it, it's becoming more random. But what I would say at present, and I said it in my talk, the forecast out there at present is not super negative. It's actually looking quite positive, even though we've just had bloody tough spring in Holbrook and October was positive. So, yeah, I use BOM. They update it every 10 days, and you've got to keep looking at the update. Don't look at it at the start of the month and think it stays the same. That happened back in 2003. At the start of October, it looked bloody terrible, and by the end of October, it had turned around substantially, and their turnaround was exactly what happened. Some people looked at it at the start of October, and they never looked at it again, and then they said, oh, geez, why didn't they tell us this change was going to occur? They did. People just didn't look at it. It gets updated every 10 days, 7 to 10 days. You need to keep looking at the updates because of the volatility is around, and you're not looking for what's happening 3 months out. You're looking for what's happening in the next 3 weeks. Best I can do.
Well handled. We've got a hand up from George.
Hey Phil, how you going?
Good, mate.
Real quick one. So just with making silage coming up, is it best to test on the way in and on the way out? Or, but a bit of a scenario, basically, if you make modules or, you wrap it in different paddocks, depending on, but you basically just want to feed the highest quality feed to your weaners, is it best to test on the way in, or is it kind of a waste of time?
Oh, I always like to get some data at the start. It's not going to get better than that, right? The quality the day you cut it is as good as it can get. It's only going to go down. And if you've done it before, your process is most likely pretty good, so your losses over making it and storing it would be pretty uniform. So if you've got some data going in, you can be pretty confident in paddocks that, you know, paddock A was by far the best. You can be pretty confident that when you go to pull it out, that's going to be your best stuff.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. Thanks.
Lovely. Thanks, George. We're bang on 8 o'clock. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, thank you all for jumping on tonight. Lovely to see you all, some new faces and some familiar ones. Rebecca and Phil, thank you. Both done a great job. Hopefully the plan is we'll have another one of these in November. Dates and speaker will be announced in the coming weeks. Other than that, have a good evening, everyone.
All the best.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Phil.
Well done.
Beck, Steph, see ya.